Magnus Carlsen is in dire straits against Arjun Erigaisi. Can you find a stunning sacrifice that Black played to win the game immediately? Pause the video and have a go. So the sacrifice is Queen takes f3. This breaks up the pawn structure on the long diagonal. After G takes f3, Bishop takes f3 check. The only move for White is Rook g2. After Bishop takes g2 check, this sets up a windmill. King g1 only move again, and now Bishop f3 check. This wins the Queen and the game for Black. If instead, back here, we play Rook takes b7, Black's got another stunning sacrifice with Rook takes g2. White can't capture with the Rook because the Queen would be hanging on d1. If White plays Rook e1 to safeguard the Queen, Black can play Rook e2 check, King g1 and mate next move. So an amazing tactical sequence from Erigaisi, and I hope you stick around to see how he set this up to beat the former #1 in the world. So here we have a recent high-profile rapid game between Magnus Carlsen and Arjun Erigaisi. So the game started knight f3, d5, d4, knight f6, c4, e6. The Queen's Gambit declined, knight c3, bishop b7, bishop f4, and this is very mainline stuff. Bishop f4 is quite a positional move. It's kind of similar to the barrier attack, except the fact you've played c4 means you're not going for any aggression. You're looking to basically break up the centre, give Black an isolated queen's pawn, then play positionally. Castles, e3, and now c5. This is a very combative move, as it basically aims to liquidate the centre as fast as possible. White can capture on c5, and the bishop will recapture. White will probably then also capture on d5, leaving Black with an isolated d-pawn. White's plan is basically to stop the d-pawn in its tracks, exchange off the pieces, and then get to an endgame where this d-pawn becomes a weakness. Meanwhile, Black is looking to basically activate his pieces as much as possible, maybe put the knight out and then go for d4 before the pieces get exchanged off. So that's the long-term plan for both sides. Magnus plays one of the main lines with d takes c5, knight c6, there's no hurry in recapturing this pawn, and now bishop e2. In my opinion, this is a bit of an unambitious move and not the best Magnus could have played. There's two other ways to play this position. One is the simple way with c takes d5, e takes, and then maybe something like bishop b5. White's basically going to castle, bring the queen out, bring the rooks to the centre, and then play against this weak, isolated pawn. He's already played e3, so he's got good coverage of the d4 square. Meanwhile, Black will play bishop takes c5. He might go knight h5 to try and get rid of this bishop, and basically make good positional moves over a long time and get into a better endgame. Another way Magnus could have played is the complex and aggressive option with a3. Now, if bishop takes c5, we can go, well, first of all, queen c2, because we've covered the b4 square. We'll be looking to play queen c2 and then b4 the next move. So let's say queen c2. Black's best move here is queen a5, as b4 is now met by bishop takes because the pawn's pinned against the rook. So we might go, for example, rook d1. We could even castle queenside here, but let's say rook d1. The bishop drops back because we're now threatening b4. Our idea here is very simple. Bishop b2, castles b4, and then we have a positional game where White has a nice edge and a clear plan of expansion. However, Magnus went for bishop e2. This allows Black to escape from isolated queen's pawn hell by playing d takes c4, which he did. Get rid of the isolated queen's pawn. He could have played bishop takes c5, and now, if White goes c takes d5, Black gets a bit more activity than before. Because knight takes, e takes, and now Black's already got 3 supporters on this d4 square, which is key. He's going to follow up with putting maybe the queen out, bring the rook to the d file, and then he'll be threatening this d4 move when he will have a better position. So he went d takes c4, a bit less ambitious, bishop takes c4, and now bishop takes c5. Quite a symmetrical Queen's Gambit decline position, but it gets fiery later. White castles, and knight h5, very nice plan. The light squared bishop has no squares along the diagonal, so White is going to lose his bishop pair. Here Magnus played queen e2, but this is not the best move, and it's equal after this move, because after knight takes f4, e takes f4, obviously Magnus has the worst pawn structure, and he's given his opponent the bishop pair. He thinks that his control of the e5 square is worth it. In my opinion, it really isn't worth it though. He should have instead gone knight e4, counter-attacking Black's bishop. This is a computer-like, tricky move to see. Black will play knight takes f4, knight takes c5, and then black, his best move is queen e7, attacking this knight. So if we take on f4, he'll take on c5, and now the plan is queen e2, rook c1. But because the queen's out on this vulnerable square, and white's ahead in development, white has an edge here. If he plays queen e2 immediately, which is what he did, he doesn't get this edge in development. Another move he could have played is just bishop g5, forcing an exchange of queens, and then white's got an edge as well. But this is where it started to go wrong, because after knight takes f4, e takes f4, black could have gone queen c7, that would have been a better move, force g3 out of white before going b6, because then after the bishop comes, the diagonal is a bit weaker. Black's probably going to end up playing knight d4 and then queen to c6, threatening mate along the diagonal. So let's say rook ac1, bishop e7 and bishop a6. It's equal, but it's probably a bit harder for black to play because he's got this pile up on the c file, and after bishop takes, the queen gets some activity. Generally, he played b6 immediately, which is not a great move order because, well, after rook c1, which is the best square for the rook, the other rook will come to d file, get time on the queen. White's plan is a3, b4, kick away the bishop, and then this knight becomes a bit weak. Additionally, we've got the plan of bishop a6 to destabilise the bishop. So it would have been best to delay this b6 move as much as possible. We go rook ad1, queen e7, very nice move, and now knight e4. Now this is another slight inaccuracy by Magnus. He should have gone a3. Again, his long-term plan is b4, his forcing the bishop back to this inferior square where it gets in the way on the d file. This might force a5 out of black when he's got this fixed, weak pawn structure on the queen side. Our knight might come to a4, for example, hit this bishop and target this pawn. If he goes bishop b7, we might go b4, bishop d6, and now we have an interesting plan of f5. Now, if Magnus had seen f5 works, I'm sure he would have played this, but it was a rapid game, so I'll cut him some slack. E takes f5, queen takes, bishop takes. We're down a pawn, but we got rook d7, and because we've got pressure on the two minor pieces, it's worth the pawn. After bishop to c8, retreating this attacked bishop, we can go rook c7. Now, let's say black plays bishop f6, counter-attacking our knight while we attack his knight. We can go knight to d5, and then after, let's say, knight e8, to safeguard the knight, we go knight takes, g takes, and then black is still up a pawn, but all his pieces are on the back rank and he's got triple isolated pawns. We'll be going knight d4, for example, and just putting so much pressure on black's position. So this would be great. Only one way the game could have gone. Anyway, Magnus went knight e4, hitting this bishop immediately, not recognising that a3, b4 was kind of necessary. So black went bishop b7, he gives up his bishop pair for activity. Here Magnus went knight takes c5, and it's just equal. Another more ambitious way to play would have been knight f g5. Now if the critical test is h6, and then knight takes f7. I'm pretty sure Magnus didn't see this. Rook takes f7. Now knight takes c5. Obviously if the queen takes, we'll just capture with the bishop or even with the queen. So b takes c5, and now queen takes e6. After queen takes, bishop takes, knight d4, bishop takes, king takes. We are up 2 pawns and a rook for 2 minor pieces, and because black's pawn structure is shattered and our rooks have a clear way into this position, white is probably for choice here, though black can hold this. Anyway, Magnus didn't see that. He played knight takes c5, queen takes c5, knight g5. His idea is to play perhaps queen h5, putting pressure on both the h7 pawn and f7 at the same time. He's got ideas of sacrificing on e6, which he does do later. Meanwhile, black will just bring his rooks to the centre, and he will aim to weather the storm on the king side before moving the knight out of the way, maybe dropping the queen back to c6 and attacking along the long diagonal. So knight e4, best move, and queen d3, knight f5. I really like this manoeuvre because the knight comes to the king side. It's a latent threat in the position. In fact, if the queen was to move, let's say back to e2, then the knight could come to g6 if we played h2, for example. The knight can come to h4, put pressure on g2, and the queen can come back to c6 now. So it's a really nice reorganising of black's pieces. Magnus goes rook fe1. His idea is to go rook e5, gain time on the queen, and put more pressure on e6 as well. Black goes queen c6, as I said, and now Magnus goes f3, which is a very poor move because he's opened up this file, and after knight h4, he's got ideas of sacrificing here. It would have been better just to drop the knight back to f3. It doesn't look great to have played knight g5 then back, but it's actually still equal. For example, the game might go rook a c8 or something, then we can go bishop a6, and then black's threats along the long diagonal have been neutralised, right? Anyway, Magnus played f3, slightly ugly looking move. And here black actually sacrifices a pawn with b5. Now this is quite clever, because if bishop takes b5, queen b6 check, king h1, rook a d8, right? And now if the queen retreats, black has such a strong attack that it's worth the pawn. For example, he can play, let's say knight d4. He's threatening to gang up on this pawn. He's gaining time on the queen and the bishop. He's threatening h6, and the knight's no longer protecting here. So it's kind of starting to fall to pieces for black, for white, sorry. Now here the best move for white is actually bishop to b3, declining this sacrifice, keeping the bishop safe and not making it vulnerable on b5, right, and not falling for this queen b6 check idea. The game might have continued here, queen b6, king h1, rook a d8. White can just drop back with queen b1, and it's slightly better for black because he's got this activity and slightly better pawn structure, but I'm sure Magnus could have held this. Instead, Magnus went for a slightly misguided sacrifice. Bishop takes e6, a blunder. Black recaptures, white goes knight takes e6, and here, well, Magnus is down a piece for 2 pawns, and black has so many nice attacking ideas. He could have gone rook f6 with the idea of rook lifting over to g6 and making this pawn be pinned against the king. He can also just go queen b6 check, which is what he did after king h1, rook f6. So white went back with knight g5. I guess Magnus's idea was queen b3, and if he gets a spare move, he can go rook to d7 and go knight f7 check, and maybe get the some kind of discovered attack along this diagonal. But I think Magnus miscalculated because he was not in time for this. Because after h6, forcing a decision with this knight, queen b3 check, king h8, white goes knight f7 check, yes, but black can actually go king h7. The king's completely safe here. The king's not forced to come back to g8. So Erigaisi managed to figure out quite a nice way to defend his king. He's probably going to end up going rook to g6, as I said. Might bring his queen back to c6, knight to h4, and the storm clouds are gathering. Meanwhile, if white goes rook to d7, it'll be several moves before he can generate any meaningful threats, because not only has he got to attack, but he's also got to look after his back rank as well. White goes knight e5, rook d8, challenging this rook on the d file, preventing rook d7. This is actually not the best move. Erigaisi missed an immediate win. It would have been better to play bishop c6 with the idea of playing, well, let's say after queen c3 you can go rook to e8 because the bishop supports the rook, right? If knight takes, then probably just the queen can take, and then black's got a winning endgame with his extra piece. The idea here is basically after g3, black will be pushing on the queen side with moves like this, and by retaining the rooks and the bishop covering this square, black can basically win positionally. So Erigaisi played rook d8. The problem with this is it allows knight d7, a fork, so the rook has to give itself up, and now it's only 2 minor pieces for a rook here. But this does allow black to penetrate with the queen. So objectively, it's still kind of equal, maybe edge for black, but this is very scary. I mean, black's got ideas of bishop takes f6, rook g8, and mate on g2, he's also going to go knight h4, mate on g2. Of course, you can't play g3 to prevent knight to here, because then the bishop will just take the weak pawn. So you can see how this awful pawn structure is immobile, doesn't defend anything, and makes white's position very poor. So white goes queen d1 to support this pawn and allow the rook to come back to d2. Quite a nifty defence, but it's too late by this point. Rook g6, very straightforward. And here the best move would have been either rook g1, just batten down the hatches, try and survive. You probably still lose though. Or let's say rook d2, black would drop back with the queen, and then he's threatening knight g3 check, so you'd have to play, let's say, king g1 or something. But then after bishop takes f3, it's not looking good. Can't take with the queen because the queen takes on e1. So Magnus blundered with rook e2, and how here the brilliant sacrifice you've all been waiting for, queen takes f3. This is amazing. This is like something from a study. You never see this in real games. Obviously, if g takes f3, bishop takes f3, the rook has to block. It's the only move, and now bishop takes g2. You don't even have to take the queen. Bishop takes g2 check, king g1, bishop f3, the discovery, and then obviously you're going to win the queen and be up a piece. If instead, after queen takes f3, let's say you take the bishop, you've got rook takes g2 now. If the rook recaptures, then we'll capture the queen on d1. If, let's say, rook back to e1, we've just got rook e2 check. So white basically can't deal with all the discoveries on the long diagonal. And Erigaisi set this long diagonal attack up as early as move 12, right? So you can see how his long-term strategy kind of was fulfilled by this attack. Anyway, a great game. Bit of a sorry ending for Magnus, and a bit sad for him to be on that losing streak, but I hope you learned something, and I hope it's been entertaining. I'll see you in the next video.